My hands trembled as I stared at the final bank statement, the numbers swimming in front of me like a cruel joke. It had arrived in the mail just an hour ago. A terse notice from our shared financial advisor outlining the transfer of funds scheduled for next week. My husband, the man I had trusted with my heart and our life, had been quietly moving our assets, rerouting our joint accounts, and preparing to cut me out of everything we had built together. I sank onto the edge of our cream-colored sofa, my breath catching in my throat. The early afternoon sun filtered through the drapes, warm on my skin, but it offered no comfort. 6 months ago, I would have been reading this statement with a smile, planning our next vacation, or deciding on a charity donation. Now every line on the page felt like a cold dagger into my chest. My name is Inara Whitfield, and I have always believed that honesty was the foundation of any partnership. I met Marcus on a rainy October evening at a gallery opening in downtown Chicago. He was tall, with a quiet confidence that drew me in, and I was a young art dealer just beginning to make a name for myself. Over time, our love story felt like one of those fabled romances, full of midnight conversations, shared dreams, and the promise of forever. But for the past few months, something had changed in his eyes. Subtle at first, a distant glance, a curt reply. I blamed it on stress. My work schedule had been relentless, and he had been preparing for a big presentation at his firm. I told myself that once things settled down, we'd be back to our old selves. Tonight, I realized how wrong I was. I rose from the sofa and crossed to the small mahogany desk in the corner of our living room. My phone lay there, its screen cracked from a careless drop last week. I picked it up and scrolled through our text messages, searching for clues. At first, everything looked normal. Good morning texts, plans for dinner, a reminder to pick up dry cleaning. But then I found the message I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry. You'll understand soon, don't worry." It was sent from his personal email, not our shared account. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., just 3 days ago, no context. No signature. My heart pounded. Was this his silent goodbye? I dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a shaky message, my voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, please call me. We need to talk." Silence. I gathered up the papers from the desk, the bank statement, the closing documents, the financial advisor's letter, and stuffed them into my tote bag. Grabbing my car keys, I rushed out of our apartment in the Gold Coast neighborhood, my mind racing. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. Marcus was at Drexel and Pierce Investments, a sleek glass tower on Wacker Drive. I slid into the parking garage, pressed the button for the elevator, and rode up to the 20th floor. The reception area was immaculate, every surface gleaming. I approached the front desk, where a polished assistant looked up at me with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Inara Whitfield. I need to speak with Mr. Marcus Whitfield." "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitfield, but he's not in his office right now." Her voice was calm, but I sensed her wonder. A wife demanding an audience with her husband at work, a scene one normally sees in movies, not in real life. I placed the papers on the counter. "He's moved our entire portfolio without telling me. I have the documents right here." Her eyes widened. She excused herself for a moment, disappeared into an office, then returned with a man in a tailored suit by her side. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm Donald Pierce, senior partner at Drexel and Pierce. I understand you have some concerns." I forced myself to speak clearly, to keep the tremor from my voice. "Yes, these transfers were authorized by Marcus. He's planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. I need to know why." Mr. Pierce exchanged a glance with his assistant. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm afraid I can't discuss Mr. Whitfield's personal affairs without his consent." Anger flared through me, fierce and wild. "This is my life you're talking about," I said, my voice rising. The other clients in the lobby turned to stare. If he's making these decisions, I deserve an explanation. Silence. Pierce sighed, then leaned closer. "I can tell you this. There's a clause in your marriage settlement that allows for unilateral asset transfers, under certain conditions. Conditions your husband apparently believes have been met. He has requested confidentiality, but perhaps you two should have worked this out before it became a boardroom matter." My chest tightened. "What conditions?" He looked at his assistant, then back at me. I'm sorry, I can't say more. Defeated, I gathered my things and left the office, the papers in my hand feeling heavier than ever. The elevator ride down was interminable, each ding of a passing floor echoing my own racing heartbeat. When I stepped out into the faint hum of traffic below, I realized that I was standing at a crossroads. Marcus had pulled a move I never saw coming, and he had weaponized our own finances against me. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the lobby window, fighting back tears. Then, with a deep breath, I straightened. I was not going to be destroyed by this betrayal. I was going to fight back. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads, laptop screens, and 3 years' worth of bank statements. My mind raced through every possible strategy. Call my lawyer, freeze the accounts, file for an emergency injunction. But as midnight approached, exhaustion threatened to pull me under. Instead of collapsing in despair, I made a plan. I would liquidate enough assets discreetly to protect my future, sell a portion of my art collection, move funds into accounts Marcus couldn't touch, set up a trust in my mother's name. It had to be flawless. Any misstep would give him more ammunition. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I opened a new spreadsheet. The numbers blurred for a moment, then clarity returned. This was war, and I was not going down without a fight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. I would liquidate enough assets discreetly to protect my future, sell a portion of my art collection, move funds into accounts Marcus couldn't touch, set up a trust in my mother's name. It had to be flawless. Any misstep would give him more ammunition. But flawless didn't mean easy. That night I barely slept. I sat in the dim light of my office, the blue glow of the computer illuminating the exhaustion carved into my features. My hands hovered above my keyboard like they belonged to someone else. I kept thinking, how long had he been planning this? How many nights had Marcus kissed me goodnight, knowing he'd already begun to disappear? The next morning, I began with a call to Lorraine Adler, my attorney. Lorraine wasn't just any lawyer. She had teeth. She'd handled high-stakes corporate divorces and had a reputation for seeing cracks in contracts that no one else did. She picked up on the second ring. "Anara," she said, no greeting, just her calm, surgical voice. "I read your message. You sure about this?" I swallowed hard. "I'm sure. Marcus is making a move. I need to make mine first." "Then come in. We'll start with an asset freeze and move from there." "Do you have documentation?" "I have enough to start a fire." "Good." By noon, I was seated in Lorraine's glass-walled office downtown, a stack of manila folders in my lap and a laptop open in front of me. Her assistant brought in coffee, and Lorraine flipped through the statements with razor-sharp focus. "Okay," she murmured. "This clause, Section 14.3 of your marital contract. He's using it to justify the transfers. It only kicks in under duress or in the event of a breach of trust. Did you cheat on him?" My head snapped up. "No!" She held up a hand. "I had to ask, because if he's arguing that, we need to be ready to rip that to shreds." "He hasn't said anything. He won't even answer my calls." Lorraine's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's making you the villain so he can gut the financials. But the thing is, he's too early. We can work with that." Together we started drafting the filings: emergency injunction, request for full financial disclosure, demand to suspend the clause until a formal hearing. As Lorraine dictated, I typed. "Your art assets? Those are solely in your name?" "Yes. Acquired before marriage. Insured, inventoried, and registered." "Good. That gives us leverage. We'll use that to set up a private trust." For the next 4 hours, I bounced between calls to auction houses, my bank's private wealth manager, and a family friend who worked in estate planning. Every move had to be precise, every transaction clean. I drove back home in the early evening, the city bathed in amber light. I passed couples walking hand in hand along the Riverwalk, their laughter echoing in the warm summer air. I used to be one of them, blissfully unaware of the storm clouds gathering. Back at the apartment, I paused at the threshold. Marcus's scent lingered, sandalwood and mint. The space was too quiet. I walked down the hall, touching the back of the sofa, the edge of the dining room chair, like they could anchor me. I stood at the kitchen island and picked up the photo frame. The two of us in Positano, laughing, wind in our hair. It felt like someone else's life. I placed the photo face down. Later that night, I got the alert. A notification from the Fidelity account Marcus had created for a new venture, one he'd never mentioned to me. A wire transfer of $245,000 had been initiated. The recipient? RMG Holdings, LLC. I stared at the screen. RMG. That wasn't his firm. I clicked through. The business was registered in Nevada, a known tax haven, under a woman's name, Rhea Montgomery. It hit me like a punch in the gut. Rhea, his assistant. I'd met her twice. Polished, pleasant, forgettable. She had handed me coffee at his birthday dinner, like she was invisible. But now, she wasn't invisible. She was the signature on the transfer. I called Lorraine immediately. She's his partner, I said flatly. Legally? No, something else. She sighed. We'll subpoena her communications, but don't confront him, not yet. But I couldn't wait. I sent him a single message. I know about Rhea. And then I waited. Hours passed, no reply. I stared at the blinking cursor in our shared Google Calendar. A reminder popped up. Dinner with Inara, 7 p.m. He'd planned it before this all began. I drove to the restaurant anyway. It was a small Italian bistro we loved, a little corner of Rome tucked into the Chicago Loop. I sat at our usual table, ordered a glass of wine, and waited. The minutes ticked by. The server checked in. The candle burned low. And then, 27 minutes past the hour, Marcus walked in. He looked surprised to see me, as if I'd been the one lying. Inara, he said, eyes darting. Sit, I said. He obeyed. I waited. I wanted to see if he'd speak first, confess, apologize, even lie. But he said nothing, just picked up the menu like this was another Wednesday night. I took out my phone and placed it on the table. Tell me about Rhea. He blinked slowly, then placed the menu down. You've been digging. And you've been hiding. You're transferring funds to her company. You're using our marriage clause. You're erasing me, Marcus. Why? He looked out the window, his jaw clenched. For a moment, he looked almost guilty. I didn't want it to go like this, he said finally. But you still made it go this way. He nodded. Rhea and it wasn't supposed to happen, but she's been there for me, Inara, in ways I didn't even know I needed. I was there for 10 years. Through every loss, every win. You were building your empire, you were always working, always planning, and I just felt like a footnote. I felt the slap in those words. I'd worked hard, yes, but it was always for both of us. The house, the trips, the investments, even the quiet nights. You decided that your feelings gave you the right to steal. It's not stealing. Then what is it? He stared at me, then down at his hands. I thought you'd be fine. I thought you wouldn't notice. That was the moment I stopped hurting. The pain burned itself out, leaving only steel behind. You thought wrong. He leaned forward. What are you going to do? I've already done it. His brows knit. You'll see. I stood, dropped 2 20s on the table, and walked out. I didn't look back. The next morning, Lorraine called me. He's filed, she said. Divorce. Claims abandonment, financial negligence, and breach of spousal trust. He's trying to paint you as unstable. Perfect, I whispered. Let him try. You ready to hit back? More than ready. That day, I called in every favor I'd earned over the last decade. Former clients, gallery owners, lawyers, tech investors. I started moving my collection, quietly and quickly. Art isn't just about beauty. It's about value. And I had millions in curated, signed provenance to prove it. By the end of the week, I'd moved 10 pieces to private holding, sold 3 to silent buyers, and converted over $1.2 million into a trust inaccessible to Marcus. The gallery I part-owned. I moved my shares under an umbrella LLC with new silent partners. Every thread he could pull was cut. I also filed a motion to investigate his transfers to RMG Holdings and began proceedings to unearth any commingled funds between him and Ria. If they'd used shared accounts even once, they were both liable. Then came the burner phone text. "You'll regret this." I smiled. Because I wasn't scared. I was just getting started. But what I didn't expect, what would blindside me next, wasn't Marcus. It was Ria. She walked into my gallery. Uninvited. Smiling. And what she said changed everything. To be continued, Ria walked into my gallery like she belonged there. It was a Thursday morning, just before noon, and I was reviewing a new installation in Gallery 2, a subtle, haunting mixed-media piece by a Ukrainian war artist I'd been hoping to represent. The gallery was quiet except for the faint hum of the climate control system. Sunlight poured through the skylights above, illuminating the suspended pieces and fractured beams. And then I heard stilettos. Sharp, precise, echoing across the polished floors like a countdown. When I turned, she was already in the center of the room, standing in front of a piece titled Fault Lines. A mirrored canvas cracked into dozens of angular fragments. Her reflection splintered across it in a dozen directions, none of them whole. "Beautiful," she murmured, tracing the air just above the surface. I didn't speak. Not yet. She turned, met my eyes and smiled. Not a smirk, not triumphant, but something harder to read, maybe even regret. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," she said. "But then again, of course you would be. This place has your DNA in its walls." I stepped forward slowly. "You're either bold or foolish to come here." She gave a soft laugh. "Both, probably, but I didn't come to provoke you." "Then what do you want, Ria?" She exhaled, looked down at her hands. No ring, but her nails were perfect, painted the same pale lavender as the folder she slowly pulled from her bag. "Marcus doesn't know I'm here, and I'm not here to defend him either. He lied to you, and to me." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "He told me you were done, that you were tired of him, that you were moving to New York to work with Sotheby's, that your marriage had been dead for years." I didn't flinch. She was fishing for sympathy. But something in her tone, something broken, made me hesitate. "He's a storyteller," I said. She nodded. "Yes, and I believed him, until I didn't." She placed the lavender folder on the pedestal between us. It sat atop a sculpture of hands, clasped and frozen in a moment of desperate grip. "This is why I came." I opened it. Inside were transaction logs. Dozens of them, showing wire transfers not just to RMG Holdings, but to other LLCs. Shell companies, some in the Caymans, one in Belize. "He said we were building a future," she whispered. "He even proposed, not with a ring but with a business plan. Said we'd start fresh, just the two of us." I believed him. I flipped through the pages. One transfer stood out, $95,000 to a woman named Ines Villarreal. The memo line read, "Lisbon residency buy-in." "Is he trying to leave the country?" She nodded. "Portugal," he said. Once the dust settled, he'd be there waiting. "He's leaving us both behind." Her eyes shone, but she blinked the tears away. "I didn't realize what he'd done to you until last week, when I saw your name blacklisted from the board he used to sit on. He told them you were mentally unstable, that you'd forged documents." I went cold. "He's burning me down. But he's sloppy, he didn't cover his tracks, and I've got the keys." I closed the folder. "Why give this to me?" "Because I'm done being his pawn, and because I'm pregnant." The silence between us shattered something invisible. She touched her stomach lightly. 6 weeks. "I'm not keeping it, but I thought you deserved to know everything before he took everything." I didn't trust her, not fully, but the folder was real. The numbers didn't lie. I handed it to Lorraine that afternoon. By nightfall, we had filed a supplemental injunction accusing Marcus of offshore embezzlement and marital fraud. The documentation Ria had provided linked him to at least 4 fraudulent transfers and 1 potential investment visa, used as leverage to sever spousal ties under international law. But Marcus didn't know that yet. So I waited. 3 days later, the summons hit him, served at his office. The look on his face, I was told, was worth a painting. His silent fury, the shattered illusion. That night, he called me. I didn't answer. Then the messages came. First a text, "You've made a mistake, we both lose." Then another, "Don't drag Rhea into this, she's not your enemy." Then silence. I moved out the next morning. Not in shame, but in armor. I packed only what was mine, my grandmother's piano, my sketchbooks, my curated wardrobe, and the portrait Marcus had painted of me during our honeymoon, the only time he'd ever picked up a brush. I left everything else. Let it rot. The new apartment was smaller but cleaner, overlooking a leafy side street near Lincoln Park. Sunlight spilled onto the wooden floors, and for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe. But peace was short-lived. On a rainy Tuesday, Lorraine called. "We have a problem." "What kind?" "He's countersuing, for defamation." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "He claims you coordinated a smear campaign, that you doctored the financial records." "Rhea gave them to me." "She's gone." I froze. "What do you mean, gone?" "Quit her job, deleted her social, disappeared." I dropped onto the sofa. "That folder, was it admissible?" "We filed it before she vanished. But without her testimony, it's just paper. We need her. Or we need someone else." Someone else. A name floated to the surface of my mind like oil on water. Darius Crane. Marcus's former partner at their firm. He and Marcus had a bitter falling out 2 years ago over an ethics violation involving client assets. The details were hushed, but the tension never disappeared. I found his private consultancy listed under a different name now, Crane Financial Strategies. I called and made an appointment. Told him I was looking for insight into asset recovery. He accepted. When I walked into his office, he recognized me instantly. "Whitfield's wife," he said, standing slowly, or should I say, ex-wife. "Soon to be, I need your help." He studied me for a moment, then motioned for me to sit. "Does this have to do with Belize or the Caymans?" My breath caught. "You knew?" I suspected. Marcus never did play a long game. I placed the lavender folder between us. He scanned the first page. Jesus, he's doubling down. "If you testify, you want me to burn a former partner in open court? That's not just risky, that's war." "He already declared war on me. You were just collateral." He sat back, exhaled. "What do you want?" "Your statement, your records, your testimony." "In exchange for?" I reached into my tote and pulled out a painting, one of his. A Crane original. He blinked. "You owned this?" "I bought it the day you resigned. You left it behind." He stared at it like he was seeing his youth. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's make a monster bleed." That night, Lorraine filed a new motion. With Darius's affidavit, new subpoenas, and a formal request for a financial freeze on all overseas assets under Marcus's name. But before the judge could review it, something else hit me like a train. A call from the Lisbon embassy. "Ms. Whitfield, we have reason to believe someone has applied for residency under your name, using forged documents." I nearly dropped the phone. "Residency? In Portugal?" "Yes, and the application includes a passport scan and banking references from accounts that match your identity." Marcus hadn't just tried to erase me. He was trying to become me. And I had 48 hours to stop him. To be continued. The embassy official's voice still echoed in my ears as I paced my living room, phone clutched tight. The Lisbon skyline burned into my imagination like a sinister postcard. Marcus had forged documents to apply for residency under my name. He wasn't just trying to erase me. He was trying to *** me. I'd spent the past 2 weeks building a legal case, moving my art portfolio, establishing financial protection. But identity theft? This was darker, personal, surgical. A desecration of my very existence. And the scariest part was how precise it all was. The embassy official, a woman named Carolina Sa, had called to confirm my identity before flagging the application for fraud. The packet had been received through a private immigration attorney in Lisbon, complete with notarized scans of my passport, tax returns, and a letter from a fake employer claiming I'd taken an executive art role at an international museum. He had studied me asterisk to do this. Carolina had already notified Portuguese authorities and placed the application on hold, but she warned me, if we hadn't flagged this early, the residency would have been approved within 10 days. I hung up the call, heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. Lorraine was the first person I called. She didn't answer. Second was Darius. He's escalating, I told him as soon as he picked up. He forged documents. He's trying to assume my identity overseas. Darius didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was low. I knew he was capable of betrayal, but not reinvention. What do we do now? We go nuclear. That night, Lorraine finally called me back. She was breathless, on edge. I've been in court all day. We got the financial freeze approved. But this? Identity theft across international borders? That's a felony. Multiple, actually. Will that help us in the divorce proceedings? It might dissolve them entirely. If we can prove he's committed identity theft, fraud, and attempted international evasion, he'll be disqualified for making claims. His entire case collapses. And criminal charges? Possible, maybe even extradition down the line. A flicker of guilt stirred in my stomach. I pushed it down. He'd earned every consequence. We'll need affidavits, embassy confirmations, and digital forensic evidence. I'll call a contact in the FBI. FBI? Yes. Financial Crimes and Cyber Division. They've handled cases like this. If he used your name, your passport, your data, he's not just committing fraud. He's impersonating a U.S. citizen for personal gain abroad. And Ria? Still missing, but I've sent out a subpoena for her to testify if she resurfaces. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the window. The city outside was a blur of lights and rain. I was unraveling a man who had once kissed my eyelids goodnight. The next morning, I received an encrypted file from the embassy's Digital Crimes Division. It contained the entire forged application. Marcus had signed it with a shaky imitation of my signature. He'd attached doctored bank statements showing a salary from a shell gallery in Amsterdam. Even worse, he'd used a real piece of my art collection as part of the portfolio he submitted to the fake employer. He knew my life so intimately, and he was weaponizing it with surgical cruelty. I sent the file to Lorraine and Darius immediately. Within 24 hours, the FBI confirmed an open investigation. They requested a full forensic review of all my devices, emails, and cloud storage. A two-person team visited my apartment. They were courteous but brisk. I surrendered everything. This happens more often than you think, one of them, Agent Nguyen told me. It's like a game of chess to some men, especially the ones who don't think the law can touch them. He didn't just want to steal my money, I murmured. He wanted to wear my skin. Agent Nguyen nodded grimly. And you stopped him. I didn't feel victorious. I felt violated. That weekend, I received a subpoena to appear in court. Marcus's defamation suit was moving forward. The court hadn't yet absorbed the FBI's findings or the identity theft accusations, so the timeline was a mess of overlapping hearings. But I was ready. Courtroom 4C was gray, windowless, and oppressively silent. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by a sleek lawyer in a navy suit and a second associate tapping notes on a laptop. He looked thinner than before, more angular. His eyes flicked up once when I walked in, and then quickly away. Lorraine stood beside me. "Let him hang himself," she whispered. The hearing began. Marcus's attorney launched into a carefully curated attack. He accused me of defaming Marcus's reputation, forging financial documents, and attempting to sabotage his future earnings with malicious intent. I watched him lie with surgical elegance. Then it was our turn. Lorraine presented the embassy documentation, the forged application, the falsified employer, the digital fingerprints. The judge narrowed her eyes. Is Mr. Whitfield aware there is an ongoing federal investigation into these allegations? Marcus's attorney tried to object, claimed it was irrelevant to the defamation suit. Lorraine stepped forward. Your Honor, if a man attempts to steal his wife's identity and abscond with her assets abroad, the question isn't whether she defamed him, but whether she was too restrained in her accusations. The courtroom fell into shocked silence. The judge called a recess. Outside, Marcus approached me. You don't have to do this, he said. His voice wasn't angry, it was pleading. I stared at him, this man who once danced with me barefoot in the kitchen, who cried with me after miscarriages, who called me his lighthouse. I didn't have to, I replied. You made me. His jaw tightened. You were always too ambitious, too cold, too perfect. And you were never enough. The next day, the court froze all of Marcus's domestic accounts and placed a hold on his passport. The week after, the FBI executed a search warrant on his office and seized 3 devices. And 2 weeks later, Ria was found. She was in Zurich, at a wellness retreat, apparently suffering from emotional trauma. But she agreed to testify. Her statement was devastating. She confirmed everything: Marcus's manipulation, the proposal under false pretenses, the wire transfers, and the Lisbon plan. She even turned over WhatsApp messages where Marcus detailed the steps he'd take to rebrand himself as an international curator with a dead ex-wife. Dead. That word stuck to me like ice. He didn't want to divorce me. He wanted to bury me. The final court date was set for the end of the month. I spent the days leading up to it finalizing the trust, securing the gallery under a permanent protective foundation, and donating a portion of my art proceeds to a women's legal defense fund. I wasn't just reclaiming my name. I was building a wall around it. On the morning of the hearing, I wore navy silk, no jewelry. Just the simple silver ring my grandmother gave me when I graduated. The judge reviewed all submitted evidence for nearly an hour before speaking. When she did, her words were iron. This court finds that Mr. Marcus Whitfield engaged in multiple acts of fraud, willful misrepresentation, and attempted identity theft against the respondent. All claims of defamation are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the court grants full asset protection to Ms. Whitfield and relinquishes all of Mr. Whitfield's claims to shared property. It was over. But I didn't feel free. Not yet. I walked out of the courthouse into the gray light of late afternoon. People passed me like ghosts. I stood still, breathless. Darius found me first. He's going to jail, he said. Maybe. You won. I turned to him. No, I stood survived. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The sun dipped below the skyline. A new painting hung above my desk, one I hadn't shown anyone yet. It was a mirror, cracked down the center, but framed in gold. To be continued. The night after the verdict, I slept for 12 uninterrupted hours. It was the first time in weeks that I didn't dream of locked doors, crashing waves, or the sound of Marcus's voice whispering half-truths. I awoke to stillness, a sacred, unfamiliar kind. No footsteps outside my apartment, no lawyers texting before dawn, no cold adrenaline coiling in my stomach. Just quiet. And yet, as I sipped my coffee in the kitchen, that peace felt like borrowed time. Because while the court had ruled in my favor and the FBI had begun pressing charges for fraud and attempted identity theft, Marcus wasn't finished. Men like Marcus never are. I knew it when I saw the white envelope slid under my apartment door. No postage, no sender. Just my name. Inside, a single sheet of paper, printed in a font too clean to feel human. You may have won the battle, but you don't own the story. Below that, a link. No context. I didn't click it, not immediately. I called Lorraine, sent her a picture, and asked her to trace the domain. She called me back within the hour. He's trying to poison the narrative, she said. The link goes to a private blog, anonymous. But it's him. He's publishing pieces, half-fictions, spinning you as the abuser, the manipulator, painting himself as a man broken by your ambition. My throat went dry. Can we shut it down? Not directly. He's using servers overseas. But if we can prove malicious intent, we can sue. Again. I opened the blog. The headline stopped my heart. My life with a beautiful monster. The photo beneath it was from our honeymoon. Me, laughing in the surf, wind in my hair. The image had been edited, desaturated to make me look colder, almost ghostly. A paragraph below described me as a rising power obsessed with control, who once threatened to slit her wrists in a gallery office if I ever left. Lies. Cruel, cinematic lies. He was trying to rebrand me the way he'd once tried to reinvent himself. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Then I shut it. And called a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Genevieve. A media fixer. We met when I curated a show for an embattled tech mogul 5 years earlier. She specialized in digital reputations, crisis control, and narrative warfare. Tell me everything, she said. I sent her the blog. She called me back within 30 minutes. This is amateur work, she said. But the danger is in its plausibility. He weaves just enough truth to anchor the fiction. That makes it sticky, dangerous. Can you kill it? Not entirely. But I can drown it. Within days, Genevieve launched a counter-campaign. Quiet, calculated, and devastating. She arranged interviews with art magazines I trusted, secured op-eds from gallery owners, curators, and artists who'd worked with me. Reframed my story as a woman who survived financial betrayal and emerged stronger. Not pitiful. Powerful. We never mentioned Marcus by name. That would have fed the beast. Instead, we spoke in layers, in tone, in truth. It worked. Within a week, the blog traffic flatlined. His story, his sad, self-serving opera, was reduced to whispers in corners that didn't matter. But victory had a strange aftertaste. For every article praising my resilience, there was a quiet voice inside me asking how much of me had been changed forever. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Around this time, Darius called me with unexpected news. There's a buyer, he said, for the Positano painting. My heart twisted. The painting. Marcus had painted it during our honeymoon. Me in a sundress, overlooking the cliffs, a loose watercolor he'd once promised would hang above our fireplace until we were old. I thought it was in evidence storage. It was returned, court deemed it personal property, and since it was in your possession, it's yours. Who wants to buy it? An anonymous collector in Switzerland. Through an auction house in Geneva, they offered $150,000. I stared at the blank wall in my hallway. Sell it. Are you sure? It was always a lie. I watched the courier remove it 2 days later. I didn't feel loss, only space. Later that week, I received word that Marcus had officially been indicted. 3 counts of fraud, 1 of identity theft, 1 of falsifying government records. He was out on bail, pending trial. He had vanished from his job. His social media was wiped. No one knew where he was. But I did. Because a week later, I saw him. At a coffee shop. Of all the places in the world, Marcus was sitting at the counter of a tiny cafe near Navy Pier, reading a copy of Asterisk, The Economist, dressed like he belonged to another century. Plain clothes, wireframe glasses, a man trying to disappear in plain sight. I froze. But he saw me. He didn't move. I walked past the window, heart pounding. I didn't go inside, but I texted Lorraine. He's here. She sent it to the FBI. They made no move to arrest him. They already knew his location. He was under GPS surveillance. But seeing him reminded me, some ghosts wear flesh. They haunt you not through memory, but proximity. I left Chicago 2 weeks later. I moved to Edinburgh. Why Scotland? I didn't know, at first. Only that it was far and ancient. A city built on bones and fog. A place where reinvention didn't require erasure. I found a loft near Dean Village. High ceilings, stone walls, a window that looked out over the river. I opened a small studio, not a gallery, just a space to create again. And I began to paint. Not for auctions, for myself. My first series was called Unsaid. Canvases of half-spoken things. A hand reaching through water, a mouth stitched shut with silk, a door slightly ajar with light spilling through. People came. And then stayed. They didn't ask about Marcus. They asked about my color choices, my strokes, my silence. I met a woman named Isla, a photographer. She showed me how to see light again. We weren't lovers, but we were something softer, a shared space of healing. Months passed. Then one night, while walking along the shore of Portobello, my phone rang. It was Lorraine. He's gone. What do you mean gone? He didn't show for trial. His GPS ankle monitor was found in a locker at Union Station. No sign of him. No recent activity. Interpol? Not yet. They're classifying him as a fugitive. I stared out over the cold black water. Do you think he's in Portugal? Maybe, or somewhere colder, farther. I hung up and sat down in the sand. The tide crept toward my boots, and I remembered his words. You may have won the battle, but you don't own the story. But maybe I didn't need to. Maybe survival was the better ending. Maybe silence was power. A year later, I stood in front of a packed hall at a museum in Glasgow, presenting my newest series, Inheritance. It wasn't about Marcus. It was about legacy and letting go. After the applause faded, a woman approached me. Late 40s, sharp eyes, American accent. You're Inara Whitfield. Yes. I'm with a federal unit. We believe Marcus was seen in Morocco. Is he still running? She nodded. But his trail is thin. He'll be looking for a new name soon, a new face. He's a man who doesn't know how to be alone. I smiled. Then, he'll keep making mistakes. She studied me. You're not afraid. Not anymore. The room behind me buzzed with laughter and wine and art. And somewhere, maybe across a border, maybe in a different name, Marcus would see a headline. About the woman who had once loved him. About the paintings, the accolades, the exhibitions. And he would know he failed. Because I didn't just survive him. I turned him into a frame and left him empty. To be continued. I turned him into a frame and left him empty. But that didn't mean he was gone. Even as the museum echoed with applause and the curator whispered to me about potential acquisitions and grants, a single thought trailed me like smoke. Marcus was still out there. I had faced his betrayal, his fraud, his psychological warfare. I had survived the court, the blog, the whispered lies in polished corridors. But ghosts like Marcus didn't fade. They waited. They evolved. They became myth and monster. And monsters, I'd learned, rarely disappear. They migrate. It began again 3 weeks later. A letter arrived in Edinburgh. Handwritten. No return address. Postmarked from Prague. It wasn't threatening. In fact, it was strangely polite. Inara, if you're reading this, it means I still exist to you in some way. I never wanted to hurt you. But you wouldn't stop. You made me the villain. You made me a story. I hope someday you'll understand what it costs to be in your shadow. You were always the hurricane. I was just the tide. M? I sat at my desk, holding the letter with gloved fingers. Genevieve had warned me, narcissists don't write endings. They write bait. I called Lorraine, even though it was past midnight in Chicago. She answered on the second ring. He sent something again? Yes, from Prague. Forward it. We'll route it through federal postal fraud. Might even get the Czech authorities to flag his trail. He says I made him the villain. She sighed. Of course he does. That's the only role he understands. I burned the letter. By spring, I was preparing for my first solo installation since the trial. It was called Echoes. I didn't tell anyone, but every piece was a response to Marcus's manipulation. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. Each canvas was a memory I deconstructed and repainted. The hotel lobby where I learned about Ria, the courtroom chair where I sat as he lied, the cracked frame of the Positano watercolor. Genevieve flew in from New York. She stood beside me during the opening night like a silent guardian. "Your work has teeth now," she whispered. It always did. Now they show. Isla was there too, not holding my hand but never far. We drank white wine and watched the press murmur. Not about Marcus, about light, line, shadow. About me. But 2 days after the show opened, a woman appeared in the studio. She wore a green wool coat and had a map of silver in her hair, American accent, sharp gaze. "You're Ms. Whitfield?" "I am." She handed me a card. "Department of Homeland Security, Financial Crimes Task Force." "Can we talk?" We walked to the cafe 2 doors down. She ordered black tea. I didn't touch my cup. "We've been monitoring Marcus Whitfield's activities for the last 14 months. He's been moving through Eastern Europe using multiple aliases. Recently, he made contact with a stolen identity broker in Bratislava." "What does he want?" She opened a folder. Inside was a passport. With my name. My face. But it wasn't my photo. It was someone else's, a composite. A digital reconstruction of my features altered slightly. "He's not just trying to disappear," she said. "He's trying to rewrite who you are, again." I swallowed hard. "Can you stop him?" "We're working on it, but this isn't about extradition anymore. It's identity terrorism." "Is he dangerous?" "To his narrative, yes, he's obsessive. You destroyed the version of himself he built with you. Now he's trying to build a counterfeit." I leaned back. "I won't run." She smiled. "Didn't think you would." Later that week, a package arrived at my studio. No note. Inside, a painting. Not one of mine. Not Marcus's style, either. But unmistakably about me. It showed a woman standing on a cliff, arms outstretched, hair on fire. Below her, a man in a boat, rowing away, looking back with hollow eyes. I placed it on the floor, stared at it for hours. Was it a threat? A confession? Or just a scream? I didn't report it. I hung it in the back room, labeled it untitled. Sometimes, power means refusing to flinch. In early May, Genevieve arranged for me to speak at a symposium in London about art, trauma, and reinvention. I stood in front of 300 people and told my story, not Marcus's version, not the court's. Mine. When I finished, the room stood. And I cried. Because somewhere in the applause, I forgave myself for loving him. A month later, Darius called me. He made a mistake. What kind? He used a forged ID to open a crypto account in Austria, under your name. It triggered a red flag. Did they catch him? Not yet, but they will. Will you testify again? You don't need me anymore. You're the whole case now. In June, I returned to Chicago for a brief visit. It felt different, like a stage set I'd once lived on. I visited my old gallery. The staff had changed. New artists lined the walls. One of them stopped me outside the restroom. "You're her, right? The Inara?" I nodded. "I studied your case. At Columbia. They're teaching it now? As part of narrative reclamation." I smiled. "You're not afraid anymore?" she asked. "No, just careful." Before I left, I walked by the old apartment. The one where Marcus and I built our future. It was empty. For lease. The windows were clean, the door repainted. But I knew, beneath the paint, beneath the walls, my laughter still echoed, my tears stained the floor. And Marcus's lies were sealed in the bones of the foundation. I pressed my palm to the door one last time and walked away. Back in Edinburgh, Isla was waiting with wine and silence. She didn't ask what I'd seen, only said, "You look lighter." And I was. I had buried the man who tried to steal my name. Not with hate, but with art. With truth. With time. And somewhere, I believed, Marcus would make one final mistake. And when he did, I'd be ready. Because this story wasn't his. It never was. To be continued. By midsummer, Edinburgh had bloomed into a mosaic of movement and murmur. The festival crowds returned, students with cameras, actors in full costume leafleting corners, violinists bowing until their fingertips bled. Life was everywhere. I wandered among it with Isla sometimes, but mostly I kept to myself. I was painting again, not for commission, not for gallery curation, just for breath. My studio smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, and long days. My fingers were always stained with pigment. Reds, blues, ash-black hues that never seemed to fully leave the skin. On a Wednesday, I received a parcel from the U.S. consulate. Inside was a copy of the Austrian Red Flag Report. Marcus had tried to open yet another crypto exchange using a variation of my legal name. The signature was off by just enough to tip the algorithm. They hadn't caught him yet, but the pressure was mounting. I took the file, closed my easel, and walked down to the water. That night, I burned the copy in a steel fire basin overlooking the Firth. Let the embers rise and scatter. I wasn't going to feed his game with fear. 2 days later, I received an email. No subject line, no greeting, no name, just a link. For a moment, my stomach turned, but Genevieve had taught me how to check safely. I copied the URL into a separate device and ran it through 2 layers of digital shielding. It was a video, posted anonymously, titled The Hurricane. And it was about me. A montage, softly narrated clips of news reports, art exhibits, and silent photographs of me in court, on stage, in my studio. Spliced between them, out-of-focus footage of a man's hands sketching a woman's silhouette. A voice, altered, electronic, whispered over piano music. She made me nothing. She devoured, she consumed, and still, I miss her. I watched it only once. Then forwarded it to Lorraine and DHS. Genevieve called me an hour later. It's amateur, but poetic, like a predator trying to paint himself as prey. Is it dangerous? Yes, because it's seductive, and Marcus's whole power was always performance. Can you get it taken down? We're trying, but it's circulating in private channels, artistic forums, academic circles. People think it's experimental film. Of course they do, I whispered. Because Marcus knew his audience. Knew how to play the wounded genius. How to twist fiction until it looked like catharsis. He'd learned that from me. The days passed slower after that. My work deepened, became more surreal, more spatial. Isla said I was painting silence. You're giving shape to what people never say, she told me one morning, as she studied a triptych titled No Exit. That's all he ever gave me, I replied. Unspoken things, missing pieces. We didn't speak about Marcus often, but she knew. She always knew when his shadow passed near. By September, DHS confirmed they were closing in. We traced one of his aliases to a flat in Ghent, Agent Kessler told me over a secure call. He's using a fractured Belgian identity, Bart van Mierlo. Your signature shows up on a forged art loan from that alias. He's impersonating me again? Not just impersonating, selling fakes under your name. Art forgeries. It was almost poetic. Do you have enough to arrest him? Almost. He's good at slipping, but one more misstep. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my studio, watching the city lights flicker through the rain. If Marcus was caught, it would be over, the final chapter. But was I ready for that? For a world without the looming shadow, without the waiting? For an ending? The ending came a week later. Marcus Whitfield was arrested at a ferry terminal outside Bruges. He was using a false passport in the name of Bart van Mierlo. Authorities found 5 USB drives, 3 fake passports, and 9,000 euros in untraceable bills in his duffel bag. No weapons. Just fragments of borrowed lives. He didn't resist. The trial would be held in Belgium, under European fraud statutes, but extradition was also on the table. Lorraine called me first. "It's done," she said. "He's in custody, finally." "Do I have to testify again?" "Possibly, but not yet. Right now, it's all procedural. He's being charged with international identity fraud, cyber forgery, and violation of financial sanctions." I thanked her, then hung up, and stood by the window. Rain fell in ribbons. The city breathed. Isla came over with tea and said nothing. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that holds everything. Then I walked to my studio, opened a fresh canvas, and began something new. The next few months moved like fog over water, slowly, quietly. People reached out. Journalists, academics, lawyers from other countries. Everyone wanted to study the case. Turn it into a book, a documentary, a lecture series. I said no. I wasn't a story, not anymore. I was a woman. Alive. I did, however, agree to a panel at Oxford about art and identity in the digital age. I spoke for 20 minutes, not about Marcus, about creation, about the theft of names, about how artists have always been at risk of erasure, and how we reclaim ourselves. The audience gave a standing ovation. Backstage, a young man approached me. "You helped my sister," he said, without knowing it. "How?" "She was in an abusive marriage. She read about you. She said if you could get out, so could she." He handed me a folded paper. Inside was a sketch. A woman standing on broken glass, hands open. Below it, "Thank you," I cried in the train station that night. Not out of grief, but gratitude. Because I realized Marcus had tried to make me vanish. Instead, I became a lighthouse. That winter, I returned to Chicago for one last show. Echoes 2. Every piece was new, every frame sharp, intentional, defiant. The press was relentless. But I remained quiet. Let the work speak. One critic called it, quote, "a cathedral of reclamation." I liked that. At the closing night, Darius appeared. Older, grayer, but still sharp. "I saw the footage," he said, "of the arrest. He looked gone. He was gone long before they took him. How do you feel?" "Like I no longer need to answer that question." He laughed and hugged me. It was the first time I didn't flinch. On the flight back to Edinburgh, I watched the clouds unravel below me and realized something. There would be no final part. No neat epilogue. Just chapters, canvas after canvas, truth after truth. And I was still painting. To be continued. Back in Edinburgh, the air was crisp with December's bite. The Christmas markets had transformed Princes Street into a glowing tunnel of cinnamon and pine. Street performers strummed carols near the castle steps. I passed them in the evenings, scarf pulled tight, fingers curled around coffee cups, watching families gather, tourists pose, lovers lean into each other's warmth. I walked alone, but it wasn't loneliness anymore. It was solitude, intentional, rich, healing. The trial in Belgium was underway. I was following it only in fragments. Lorraine kept me updated with sparse summaries. I knew Marcus had pleaded not guilty. That his defense team argued mental deterioration, artistic delusion, financial pressure. They'd even tried to claim that I had inspired his identity theft through manipulation. But the evidence was damning. Ria's testimony, submitted via affidavit, tore through his defense like acid. The Interpol records, the crypto accounts, the anonymous video. And, of course, the stolen paintings. He was facing 10 years minimum. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate. Justice, I learned, wasn't a parade. It was a quiet room where you finally stopped whispering. Isla had gone to Paris for a photo residency, and I welcomed the time alone. I buried myself in a new series, one without a name, just shapes, colors, silence made solid. And then one morning a box arrived. Wooden, unmarked. Inside, the Positano painting. The original. The one I had sold. No note. Just the canvas, wrapped carefully, as if it had never left my possession. I stared at it for hours. It had aged, slightly curled at the edges, faint water damage in one corner. But the scene was unchanged. Me, in a yellow dress, laughing toward the sea. Was it guilt? A gesture? An omen? I didn't know who sent it. The auction house wouldn't confirm. The shipping label was blank. I hung it in my studio. Not out of sentiment, but because I wanted to see it rot. Every morning I walked past it, traced the brushstrokes, noted the flaking varnish, let the illusion decay. Weeks passed. Newspapers began to run Marcus's trial alongside others. White-collar criminals, fallen CEOs, disgraced artists. He had become one in a crowd. A cautionary footnote. Genevieve called to ask if I wanted to give a statement. "Now's the time," she said. "You'll be heard." "I don't want to be heard." "Then what do you want?" "I want him to be forgotten." And for the first time, she understood. January arrived. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 11 years, no parole. Lorraine called me the moment the gavel fell. "It's done," she said. "No appeals?" "He tried, rejected." "What did he say?" "Nothing. He sat there, blank." I thanked her. Then turned off my phone. The days after were strange. I'd imagined that moment. Over and over. That final closure. That end. But it wasn't a thunderclap. It was snow falling on rooftops. Quiet, unnoticed. I walked through the market with my coat open, letting the cold sting my skin. I tasted roasted chestnuts from a vendor, bought a book from a stall along the canal. Life resumed, not because the villain was vanquished, but because I had stopped needing him to vanish in order to breathe. That night, I painted over the Positano piece. Gesso, thick, white. Every stroke erased a memory. Every coat rewrote a lie. Until the canvas was blank. A new beginning. February brought a surprise. An email from Columbia University. They were launching a series on art, memory, and power. They wanted me to keynote, to speak about the intersection of creative legacy and personal survival, not about Marcus, about endurance, about rebuilding. I said yes. The hall was filled. I wore black silk and spoke slowly. When someone tries to steal your name, they're not after your signature, they're after your soul. But what they never understand is that souls regenerate, like skin, like cities, like stories. Standing ovation. Afterwards, a student approached me. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Anger, fire." "I burned that long ago." I returned to Edinburgh feeling emptied in the best way. Isla greeted me with sunflowers. We danced in the kitchen. We said nothing about the trial, only about the flight, the snow, the future. In March, I received an email. From the prison. A request for a visitor pass. Marcus. Denied. I didn't even have to respond. Lorraine intercepted it and flagged it as harassment. I stood at my studio window that night, staring at the sea. "You don't get the last word," I whispered. "You already used it." April. The museum in Glasgow launched a retrospective of women artists whose work emerged from crisis. They featured me. But they didn't tell my story. Just showed the art. That was enough. At the opening, a girl no older than 16 walked up to me, clutching a sketch pad. "I don't want to be a victim," she said. "You already aren't?" We hugged. I gave her my brushes. Summer came slowly. Isla's residency ended. She returned, suntanned and glowing. We sat in the garden, feet in the fountain, passing a bottle of wine. "You're not haunted anymore," she said. "No, I just remember." "What now?" "I teach, I paint, I forget. Then I remember, then I forget again." She smiled. "That's life." "No, that's survival." And survival, I learned, was its own kind of art. To be continued. Summer deepened in Edinburgh, though in Scotland, summer never quite meant heat. It meant longer light, softer mornings, the smell of honeysuckle brushing the edges of the old stone streets. My studio windows remained open all day, the breeze teasing the edge of every canvas, the distant sounds of city life muted beneath the rustling of ivy climbing my outer wall. And I was, for the first time in years, creating without ghosts. Not just painting to process, not painting to survive, painting for the sake of beauty, of wonder. It felt unfamiliar at first, like learning to speak after years of silence. But slowly I remembered what it meant to make something without fear. One evening in late June, Isla returned from a weekend at her family's cottage in the Highlands. She carried 2 rolls of film and a battered brown notebook full of clippings and sketches. "We should do a joint show," she said, spreading the photos out across our living room floor. "Theme, unseen things." I laughed. "Define unseen." She shrugged. "Moments you feel but can't photograph, memories you remember wrong, the way grief smells, the way rage tastes." I stared at her. "You're not just a photographer." "No," she said. "I'm a mirror, and you're the frame." The next day we began planning. We titled the show Nonseen/Unsaid. The name felt right. Not a declaration, not a manifesto, a murmur, a breath between confessions. We rented a narrow gallery space tucked in Old Town. The walls were raw plaster, the ceilings were low, the windows massive, everything echoed. My pieces were more abstract now, paints layered over textured burlap, threads pulled loose, words scraped beneath pigment. Titles like Inheritance Without Language, Naos, Salted Silence, Naos, 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 the Fifth Goodbye. Isla's photographs blurred the boundary between form and movement. A woman's shadow stretching across wet cobblestones, a violin bow mid-air, a broken teacup on a windowsill. We didn't explain any of it. We let people feel. Opening night, the room was packed. Some faces I recognized, gallery curators, students, writers, who had followed my case without ever meeting me. Some I didn't, strangers with wet eyes and notebooks, whispering to one another in reverent tones. One man stood a long time in front of a piece I'd titled Trying for Resignation is a Weapon Too. It was a dark canvas, almost empty, except for a single red thread trailing out of the corner. He turned to me and asked, "How did you know?" I didn't reply. Some things don't need answers. Some things only need to be witnessed. The reviews were kind, but it was the private letters that moved me most. One woman wrote, "Some site's husband emptied our bank account and disappeared the same week I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I thought I'd never survive. I saw your piece, Dissolution, and I did." Another said, "You reminded me I'm still here, that being broken doesn't mean I stopped being mine." I hung every letter in the back room of my studio, a wall of survival. One afternoon in July, I received a letter from Lorraine. A hard copy. Inside, 2 things. 1. A court document confirming Marcus's appeal had been denied at the European level. No further legal pathways remained. He would serve his full sentence. 2. A photograph. Marcus. From the prison. His hair was thinner. His face sallow. His eyes still too empty. I stared at it for less than a second, then slid it back into the envelope. "No," I said aloud, "not today." I walked it out to the canal, fed the photo into the wind, let it fly. The show ran for 3 weeks. On the last night, Isla and I stayed after everyone had left. We lit a candle, played music, drank wine on the gallery floor. She looked at me through the candlelight. You're not the same. I know. You're whole, but it's a different shape. Better or worse? Truer. We toasted to truth. Then we danced. No one watched. We didn't care. In August, I was invited to speak at the Royal Academy in London, not as a guest artist, as a fellow. I stood in that hallowed hall of oil and marble and thought of every door Marcus ever tried to close behind me, and how I'd opened every one by painting the key. By autumn, I had begun mentoring 3 students, all women, all survivors. None of them liked that word. One of them, a Syrian refugee named Lean, said it best. I'm not surviving, I'm resisting, that's different. And it was. I taught them what no syllabus ever did: how to name a wound without reopening it, how to hold a brush without shaking, how to let pain become pigment and pigment become power. They didn't need a teacher, just a witness, just someone who'd made it through the fire. On a rainy October evening, Isla took me to a rooftop jazz show. As the quartet played under string lights, she reached for my hand, her fingers warm, her smile soft. "Stay," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. I wasn't running anymore. Not from Marcus. Not from memory. Not from the soft, terrifying possibility of peace. The next morning, I opened a letter from the Belgian Ministry of Justice. They were creating an educational campaign on financial coercion and identity theft in personal relationships. They wanted to use my story. Not the headlines, the director wrote, the healing. I said yes, because the storm wasn't mine anymore, but the lighthouse always would be. Spacey lines. The invitation arrived in early November. An envelope the color of linen with the royal emblem of Belgium embossed in silver. Inside, a letter personally signed by Minister Adrien Leclerc himself, head of the Belgian Ministry of Justice. They were launching a global initiative, Resilience and Reform, Identity Protection in the 21st Century. And they wanted me to be the keynote speaker at the inaugural summit in Brussels. Not as a victim, not as a cautionary tale, but as a case study in endurance, transformation, and the reclaiming of narrative. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it between the pages of a notebook I kept on my nightstand, one filled not with sketches but with names. Names of women who had written to me. Names of young artists I had mentored. Names of survivors who hadn't survived. I said yes. In the days leading up to the summit, I felt the edges of old anxieties press in. Marcus was in prison, his appeals denied, his name fading from headlines. But trauma had a way of echoing. I still flinched when anonymous envelopes arrived, still double-checked locks at night, still paused before opening emails from foreign servers. Healing wasn't a straight line, it spiraled, it circled back. So I painted more. My final piece before the summit was titled, Closure Doesn't Speak. It was a canvas split in thirds, each section layered in white on white, stitched down the center with crimson thread. It sold before the varnish dried. Isla insisted on coming with me to Brussels. We flew in the day before the summit, checking into a quiet hotel tucked near Parc de Bruxelles. The air smelled of wet leaves and roasted chestnuts. I hadn't been to Belgium since the trial. The memories pressed in, courtrooms, cold hallways. The curve of Marcus's handwriting on forged papers. But they didn't pierce anymore. They brushed past. I was here for a different reason. A stronger one. The summit was held in the Palais de Justice, a towering neoclassical building steeped in history and quiet authority. I stood in the Green Chamber, watching attendees arrive. Activists, diplomats, cybersecurity experts, survivors, lawmakers. They weren't here to sensationalize a scandal. They were here to build guardrails around identity, to reimagine justice. My speech was the final one of the day. I stood behind the podium, notes in hand, but I didn't read from them. "My name is Inara Whitfield," I began, and for a time I didn't own it. The room held its breath. I don't mean legally, I mean spiritually, psychologically. When someone tried to wear my face, forge my name, sign my memories, I felt erased, like I was standing outside of my own body, watching someone else live my life in costume. I spoke for 20 minutes. About erasure, about performance, about how identity isn't just something you protect in law, it's something you protect in ritual, in art, in witness. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They stood first. Then they applauded. The sound rolled through the chamber like thunder through marble. Later that night, a survivor from Croatia approached me. He said he loved me, then sold my name to pay his debts. I haven't told anyone that until now. We embraced. I didn't need to say anything. Some griefs are too holy to speak aloud. Back in Edinburgh, I turned down 3 interview requests and 5 publishing deals. I didn't want to monetize my past. I wanted to multiply the future. So I started a foundation, Instos, the Whitfield Trust, dedicated to providing legal and emotional support to victims of identity theft and financial coercion in intimate relationships. We opened our first satellite office in Glasgow. Lean, one of my former mentees, became its first program director. She called me crying the day she signed her first survivor into the program. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered. "It's real," I told her. "And it's just the beginning." On New Year's Eve, Isla and I drove to the coast. We stood on the beach as fireworks cracked overhead, waves churning against the shore. "What's your resolution?" she asked. "To need less. To love more. To forgive the version of me who didn't know how to do either." She kissed me. And for the first time, I didn't brace against affection. I let it hold. The next morning, I found a letter slid under the door. It was from the prison. This time, it was official. Marcus. A typed letter, formal, sanitized. He wanted to donate a portion of his remaining personal assets to the Whitfield Trust. There was no apology, no emotion, just numbers. I stared at the letter for a long time, then brought it to the fireplace. Burned it. "Not yours," I whispered to the ash. "Never was." By spring, the trust had opened a second office in Lisbon, then Berlin. Lean and I presented at the UN's annual Forum on Cybercrimes Against Women. Our presentation, the Digital Bruise, was cited in 5 policy revisions. And still, I painted. Always. My new collection was titled Tom and 5 Afterlights, a word I'd invented to describe the glow that remains after a person leaves the room but hasn't yet vanished from memory. The pieces were soft, forgiving, laced with color I hadn't touched in years: ochre, blush, dusty lavender. The palette of healing. The exhibit opened in Paris that summer, sold out within 48 hours. But more importantly, it opened conversations. I received a letter from a woman in Seoul. "My husband called me a ghost for years. You made me believe ghosts can take form again. Thank you." On the anniversary of the trial, I lit a candle. Not for Marcus. For the girl I used to be. The one who believed love could excuse theft. The one who apologized for her ambition. The one who waited for someone to choose her, not realizing she had already been chosen by fire. By herself. By autumn, I stood at the front steps of a building I never expected to see again. The Palais de Justice in Brussels. But this time, I wasn't walking into court. I was unveiling a mural, commissioned by the city, 50 feet high. It showed a figure in silhouette, standing beneath a rising sun, her hands outstretched, her name engraved in gold above her. "You cannot steal what I have already made mine." Beneath it, the name of the artist. Anara Whitfield. My name. Mine. Always. To be continued. It was the winter solstice. The longest night of the year. In Edinburgh, the streets glistened with frost that refused to melt. Candles burned in every window. Bells chimed from the spires, muffled by distance and snow. The city felt sacred still. I sat in my studio, alone, listening to the silence between each breath. Across the room, my latest canvas remained unfinished. It had no title, no subject, just brushstrokes and layered shadow, like fog curling through an open doorway. I didn't know yet what it wanted to become. Not all art announces itself at once. And not all healing does either. A few days earlier, I had received word that Marcus had been transferred from the main Belgian facility to a psychiatric ward within the same prison complex. Behavioral decompensation, the report said. He'd stopped speaking, refused visitors, had begun exhibiting signs of delusional fixation. He's painting, the warden noted in a brief summary, endlessly. Often the same image, a woman standing in a doorway, looking away. I stared at that line longer than I meant to. I wondered, was it me he was painting? Or the ghost of himself he never outran? I didn't respond, didn't ask for updates. He belonged to history now. And I had a future to keep building. The Whitfield Trust expanded to include a trauma arts initiative. We named it Canvas of Voice. Workshops. Community spaces. Residencies for women creating art from pain. We opened studios in Dublin, Marseille, and Cape Town. Survivors applied from 52 countries. Our waiting list doubled in weeks. I wasn't just mentoring anymore. I was curating an army. Not of anger, but of expression. Of reclamation. Of beauty forged in fire. On January 12th, I was invited to speak at the International Tribunal for Digital Harms in The Hague. The courtroom was sharp with formality. I wore charcoal gray, no jewelry, no notes. I told them what hadn't made it into the reports. Digital theft isn't just a crime of numbers. It's a crime of meaning. A man didn't just forge my documents. He forged my memory. He altered timelines. Inserted himself into the future I was building. He didn't want to just hurt me, he wanted to become me. I paused. Let it sink. And yet, here I stand, not vanished, not broken, multiplied. A pause. Then applause. The verdict came 2 weeks later. The tribunal passed a unanimous recommendation for the inclusion of, quote, intimate identity theft as a recognized category of digital violence in the European Human Rights Charter. I was cited directly in the legislative preamble. By February, the trust had become a case study at Oxford, Yale, and Sorbonne. They called me a cultural architect. It sounded too neat, too trimmed, but I accepted it. Because every time I stood in a room and saw a woman clutching a notebook full of rage and hope, I knew we were rewriting architecture. With blood, with brush, with breath. Isla and I grew quieter. Not distant, not broken, just quiet. Two strong women with separate gravitational pulls. Some nights, we painted side by side, never speaking. Other nights, she would fall asleep on the sofa with my scarf wrapped around her wrist. One night, in April, she turned to me after brushing her teeth and said, "If you ever leave, don't vanish." I cupped her jaw. I already did once. I won't again. We kissed. We exhaled. We endured. On May 14th, I visited the prison for the first time. Not to see Marcus. To speak to the inmates. The trust had launched a pilot program on restorative dialogue. I was invited to speak to men who had committed various forms of fraud, coercion, impersonation. I walked into the assembly hall with my name pinned to my chest like armor. Dozens of eyes followed me. Some guilty, some dead, some curious. I told them about erasure, about how stealing a name was stealing a breath. One man raised his hand. "Do you think we're monsters?" I paused. Then said, "No, I think you made yourselves smaller so you could devour others." The silence afterward felt like penance. I left without looking for Marcus. But a guard stopped me in the corridor. "He asked about you," he said. "Didn't say your name. Just asked, did she become someone else?" I smiled. No, I became more of who I already was. Back in Edinburgh, I painted for a week straight. Didn't sleep much, didn't eat well. But when I was done, the canvas that had sat unfinished for months was finally whole. It showed a woman walking through 7 doors. Each door was smaller than the last, each room darker. But at the end, she stepped into mourning. I titled it Threshold. It became the centerpiece of my solo show in Berlin that summer. June brought storms. Literally. Floods swept parts of Europe. Our Lisbon office was damaged. I flew out to support the team. In the wreckage of the gallery, I found one surviving piece, a photograph Isla had taken 2 years earlier. Me, facing away from the camera, standing before a blank wall. No frame, no canvas, just space. The caption, in her handwriting, "She is the art now." I wept in a corner of the gallery. Then we rebuilt. By August, Snipes' canvas of Voice Asterisk had gone global. 12 cities. Hundreds of women. Thousands of untold truths now made visible. We held a summit in Athens. Artists, survivors, advocates, no press, no cameras. Just stories. Just fire. On the closing night, we wrote names on paper lanterns and sent them into the sea. Not names of perpetrators. Names of the selves we left behind. The selves we had to outgrow in order to survive. I wrote, Kana Nara, age 27, who thought silence was strength, who thought love had to hurt. I watched the lantern float until it vanished, and felt free. September. A letter. From Ria. I hadn't heard from her since her testimony. She lived in Madrid now, taught art to children, had changed her name, found peace. She wrote, "You saved me, not by forgiving me, by surviving me." And she enclosed a painting. A girl in a yellow dress, not laughing this time, but looking directly at the viewer. Whole, awake, real. I hung it in my home, next to Asterisk Threshold, next to the version of myself who made it. As winter returned, I stopped painting for a while. Not out of grief, out of contentment. I sat with Isla on cold mornings, reading poetry aloud. I took walks without direction. I cooked. I breathed. And in the quiet, I remembered. Peace is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of self. To be continued. Eyes. The final winter in this chapter of my life arrived without ceremony. No headlines, no letters, no cold warnings in the form of anonymous videos or legal threats. Just snow. Silent, persistent, blanketing the rooftops of Edinburgh in pale hush. The world quieted, and for once I didn't fill it with work or noise or new battles. I let the hush in. Because now, at last, I had nothing left to prove. I had my name, my voice, my peace. And I had the woman I had become, not in spite of what had been taken from me, but because of what I had reclaimed. That winter, Isla and I rented a cottage on the Isle of Skye. No electricity for 3 days. No signal. Just wind and sea and firelight. She took black and white photographs of our hands reaching toward candle flames. I sketched her in charcoal, half dressed in morning light, laughter in her eyes, a book open across her knees. It was intimacy without urgency. No deadline. No destination. No ghost chasing us through the door. Just us. One morning in the cottage, I found a letter tucked beneath my sweater. From Isla. A single line, handwritten. "You were never broken, just wildly rearranged." I cried. Not because I was sad. Because someone had finally seen me whole. By spring, we returned to Edinburgh to find the Whitfield Trust had surpassed every expectation. 10,000 women served in 2 years. New offices under construction in Nairobi and Buenos Aires. A partnership with the United Nations to build survivor-led legislation models across 17 countries. I stepped down as executive director that May. Not because I was tired. Because I was ready to give someone else the mic. Someone younger, someone brilliant, someone who had survived her own fire. Her name was Malika. She wore her scars like scripture. And the day I passed her the keys to the Edinburgh office, she said, "I learned from watching you that healing isn't a solo act, it's a choreography." She hugged me. No cameras, no speeches, just legacy passed hand to hand. My final project before stepping back was curating Reshaped, a global art installation made entirely of reclaimed materials from demolished homes, refugee camps, and abandoned prisons. Each piece told a story of transformation, objects once used to confine or define people now made into beauty. The centerpiece was mine. A sculpture, 20 forged passports, bent and melted into the shape of a rising phoenix. Beneath it, a plaque that read, "You can steal a signature. You cannot steal a soul." At the opening in Venice, a reporter asked me, "Do you think Marcus Whitfield still paints?" I smiled. "If he does, I hope he's finally painting truth." I received one final message from him that year, through legal channels, reviewed by his therapist and attorney. No signature, no request for response, just a sentence. "You were never mine, I know that now." I showed it to Isla. She said, "You don't have to answer." I said, "I already did, with my life." That summer, I painted nothing. Instead, I walked. Miles of coastline, hours through moors, collected stones, leaves, discarded keys. I carried them home, labeled them with years. Not for memory, for ritual. For every key I'd used to unlock a door, I was told I didn't belong behind. By fall, Isla and I traveled to Iceland. The landscape there felt like beginning and end, all at once. We stood under auroras and didn't speak. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we'd outlived. In a hot spring carved into stone, I turned to her and said, "I want to write." She nodded. "I was waiting for you to say it." And I did. For a year. Every morning in a house by the sea, I wrote my story. Not the version people knew, not the soundbite, not the viral saga of the woman who fought back, but the real one. The version filled with quiet terror, sacred joy, and the slow unlearning of shame. When it was done, I burned the first copy, as a blessing. The second I gave to a small independent press in Glasgow. They called it Paint Me Back. It became an international bestseller. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I had spoken, and that this time, no one interrupted. The final canvas I ever painted as a full-time artist hangs now in the entry of the Whitfield Trust headquarters. It shows a staircase with no visible end. Each step is etched with a name, names from the letters, the lanterns, the women who walked beside me through every storm. At the top of the staircase, a window, and through it, sky. I am not the same woman who once sat trembling over a bank statement, wondering how much of her life had been erased. I am not the woman who begged a man for answers or mercy or closure. I am not the woman who let her voice be redrafted by someone else's pen. I am the author now of this story, of myself, of every breath that still rises from my lungs like a promise kept. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.